Hello, guys. This is Contraption, and this is another episode of Top Players in Quarantine. Today, I have the pleasure to have by my side Simon Alexander Adams, who describes himself on his website as being a multimedia artist and designer working within the intersection of music, visual arts, and technology. Okay, so Simon, I am going to turn on your video now and your mic. And good to have you here. Hello.
Hi, yes, thanks for having me.
How are you, Simon? How are things in your part of the world?
They're doing all right. I'm happy to have work to keep me busy and things to be doing. That's like kind of the big concern right now. So just, staying busy is the goal right now.
That's great. I'm going to start with the most recent thing in your life. So you said you don't want to get into the specs of it, but I think this is great news that you are working with ARTECHOUSE.
Yeah. So starting in February, I'm working with them on their creative team to develop content. So it's just exciting opportunity. They've got some really amazing spaces and opportunities that I've been working on. We had an installation open, Hanami, only to be closed after a few days. So I'm looking forward to that also opening up again in later this summer, hopefully. Well, I'll have to see.
Yeah. It's a promising start, but with the COVID stuff, right? That's why it's okay. And this is. Can I share the screen?
Sure.
With the Instagram page of ARTECHOUSE. Is it all right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I am going to try to do this.
Here we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is it, because I've seen on this website such beautiful artworks by these guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean a lot of it is curating and collaborative work as well, or partnerships and such. And I can't speak to like a lot of it, but yeah, they do have kind of an amazing portfolio of artists who've worked in that space. That's for sure.
And where are you right now? Because
I'm in Detroit, actually.
In Detroit,
so I'm not even. I work remotely and then kind of travel as needed for installations and such. So. Technically Dearborn, but right outside of still within the Detroit metro area.
Okay, so that was ARTECHOUSE. Congratulations for that job. I think there are great things to come.
Definitely, right? I'm looking forward to the year as much as one can, given these circumstances. It should be good. Fun times.
Yeah. But now it's a good time to train and flex your muscles a bit. That's
Definitely.
the blessing in disguise. And I think a lot of users are interested maybe how did you got to work with, how did you arrive to these guys, or how did you prepare to...
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, journeys are interesting because it's like hard to look at one moment and say, oh yeah, this was it, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of it has been just kind of like a lifelong pursuit of things that interest me. I mean, I'm lucky that I get to work in a field where what I do is something I'm really passionate about. But I think the other side of it is like, if you continue to sort of explore and keep pushing at the things that excite you, that to me, that's how you find a career that, also mirrors your passion. So for me, it was, going to school for music technology and there being really interested in like interactive design and interaction design. And so out of school, that's like the big question, like, well, I'm done with school. What do I do now? And so for a while, I taught various classes as an adjunct at universities, but then also continued to sort of push on my own to sort of self-produce installations. So I did one at the Ann Arbor Film Festival, Electric Forest, so sort of things that were in Michigan. Didn't have a high budget, so I was lucky to break even on most of them, let alone be hours. This is just like, oh, I really want to do this. I need to get better. I need to make opportunities where I can try things that continue to increase the scale that I'm working at, and sort of being okay with like where you are, but just sort of keeping your eye on that next level. I would say that like if there was a key thing that I did that led to sort of being able to transition into freelance work and then now to a full-time gig, it was definitely the daily practice that I started on Instagram. I think that like that, I was inspired by Beeple, the designer, and also Zach Lieberman. So he's like the creative. He co-founded Open Frameworks, and has a daily sketching process. He has a blog article that's worth reading about it as well. I don't have it pulled up, but you can find it if you.
I know Beeple. If Beeple is who you're talking about, we know him. It's worldwide, internationally known.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at what he's done, and you look at the progress over time, and you say like, well, actually, like, there are people who do this. It's possible. You just have to do it. Is sort of the way I approached it, and I kind of tricked myself into doing it by saying, okay, I'll do it for a month, and then I just kept doing it.
How does one start to make dailies? I mean, where do you start with this?
You do have to be at a point where you feel like you have at least enough fluidity in whatever you're doing to make something every day. I think you need to also let go of, because I can be a perfectionist, so I have to let go of this sort of like, oh, is it going to be ready or is it good enough? A lot of it was actually looking at, say, like the first year of people's sketches, and saying like, oh, right. Like, if you look at where he was a year, well, now it's like 10 years ago, but like you look at where he was at the beginning of the process, and it's not about putting something out that's super high quality. It's about doing something every day and sharing it. That's really what it's about. And through that process, you can see yourself grow. And other people, of course, see that too. But, there's a lot of things that I think it can lead to. For me, it was, getting better at Touch Designer, which is partly what I set out to do. But kind of through that process, I also ended up making a lot of connections, because people then just naturally saw my work since I was putting it on a platform where they could see it. And that led to pretty much like all of the work that I got in the last year or so, I think kind of stems from that originally.
Okay. So they saw consistency, and they reacted to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
do you use a timer, or do you, I don't know, you close your phone, you tell everybody to go away for 1 hour? How do you do it?
When I do it, it depends on like what's happening in my life. I think sometimes if I'm in an installation where I'm doing like 12-hour days already on a different project, then it's just, I need to figure out how can I make something in 15 to 30 minutes. Whereas like if I think when I started the project, it was during a summer break between teaching, right? I had a really light load. I was able to maybe spend 3 hours on something if I wanted. And I still get that opportunity occasionally, but more so it's a lot of it is, okay, I'm going to iterate on something previously. And then that's a lot of what it is you say, okay, well, is there something I want to revisit where I can grab it and see if I've come up with something new from that sketch today? Or, oh, well, maybe I have an hour and I can look at a tutorial and try to make something new and draw from other people's ideas and techniques and build on my own, like that's how you build techniques, I think, is you either like follow someone else's path, or you, like research, you look at inspiration and say like, it's really cool. Someone did this thing in Cinema 4D. Can I make that in Touch Designer? Right. So it's all of those pieces, just kind of keeping your eyes open and keeping like trying to push into new directions, at least internally, right? Like I want to do something that I haven't done before. Maybe someone else did, but I'm going to do it differently because I'm not that, right? So that's, I don't know if that answered your question. I think like in terms of the time, it really depends on what's happening in my life, but it's just about
because it's not the only process. I mean, this is a process that you want to set an hour for it every day, and after that there's life, and there's other installations and other mindsets. And I'm wondering how when did you decide that I'm gonna jump from the tutorial boat? Because maybe we all been there when we do every tutorial we can find on the internet and remain in that tutorial hunger, but never it's hard to go on and do something. I mean, you step away from the tutorial, you make the tutorial, you play a little, but you don't go on this adventure that you want to build something from scratch yourself, and it's still frightening. So when is the time that you jump from this boat to the personal creation boat? Or how did it happen to you?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think I might also look at it in the sense that, everything that we are doing almost I think that it's rare that somebody is making something that's completely new, right? It's like this question of where do ideas come from?
I don't know, because in Touch Designer, it's easy to do something new.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but you're also we're standing on the shoulders of giants is this idea I think about where yes, we're doing, but we're also using derivative tools, right?
Yes.
There are tool makers and there are people who are using those tools. And I think that as more and more I want to move towards the tool maker side, because I think that's an amazing pursuit. But I also love working with tools. And so for me, it's when I think about making new things, it's okay, I've got a tool. How can I find the edges? How can I push this to the extreme, do something that it's not intended to do? And that's, that approach to software has been something that I just naturally I'm an explorer. So
yes,
that's
I
what
like
I've
that.
always done. And with Touch Designer, I love it because the edges are it's there almost aren't edges, right? You hit a wall, but you can find your way around it. Typically, especially for me, learning some GLSL has been really key, because then it comes to where I say I want to accomplish this thing. Maybe there's not a top that does it already, right? So, tops are all shaders under the hood. If you can think through what you're trying to do, you can usually write something simple that might accomplish something that just doesn't exist as a top yet. And that, has taken a lot of time to just repeatedly look at examples and work in that kind of GLSL space. But that's been really key. I think just doing it long enough too, you get to a point where you want to accomplish something and the path because you've done it so many times, or you've come up with different solutions to that problem before. And so that's when I think you get to the fluidity, is when you don't have to think about solving a lot of those problems that at first it's when you first start Touch Designer, just remembering the pieces that you need for a rendering network is enough, right? You're I can remember being there where I'm what do I need? I need a geometry and I need to plug something into that. And you're just still understanding all of the ways that you can manipulate that shape. And then it gets to the point where you're I've done that hundreds of times. You don't have to think about it.
It becomes automatic process. Yeah. And it's good to insist on the basics also, but there are a lot of basics in Touch Designer. And, everything is like Lego. I will share the screen again with your website, if I can find it here. Okay, screen 2. Okay. No, not your website. Your Instagram, but this is not your Instagram.
I think I'm right.
Yeah. Let's talk about. So these are the dailies that we talked about earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are wonderful, man. I gotta tell you, this work is amazing. There's a lot here.
Yeah, it's quite a bit.
Yeah, can you describe a little bit this work? How do you feel now? Aside from how you felt at the beginning? I mean, what has changed in your process?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think right now, compared to the beginning, I think when I first started, I had a much smaller audience, which was interesting how that affects the way that I feel about it. But also, I think just I don't know, the quality is maybe increased in my opinion, but also sometimes it's challenging to sort of say like, oh, I have a certain threshold that I'm trying to maintain of quality. But yeah, I don't know. I think of it kind of now as like I might spend a few days exploring an idea. You can kind of see that now if you look. There's some similarities sometimes between adjacent posts because I might do something and explore it for a few days or revisit something. There's a couple there where I was playing with like Vincent. He says like flex solver, or like here's a bunch where I'm running things through. There's 6 where I'm doing kind of the same idea over and over. That might have been when I was in,
this one started a controversy on the group. I remember. Yeah, this was very nice.
A lot of thoughts. And again, it's like a lot of it is drawing inspiration from other folks who are doing, might have a cool idea. Like this one, someone posted something similar, and I was like, how do I make that? So I made something, similar, and it was sort of a big chain reaction of inspiration. And sometimes that happens where someone posts something, and then it leads to a bunch of like people being inspired to explore that same concept.
Right. I always wonder, how did you do this? I mean, I've tried. I guess everybody tried.
I can't remember, to be honest. I think it was. I think it was a very like expensive process. Like it's not like a great real time.
Right. Okay, because of the shadows, right?
Yeah, I think it was just like some settings in the shadows. But again, this was like November, so usually I have to like pull something open to fully remember what I did.
Yes.
But like here, you see a series of kind of like exploring. Oh, we moved on, but like there's a lot of you can kind of see the similarities, and that's how I think it can help to do that. I have someone who I went to school with who's been doing this lately, and she said that it helps to like kind of do them in sets, and I totally would agree that if you can kind of like choose one thing and then create variations for the next couple of days, that often makes it easier on your time and sanity.
But it's kind of hard not to do them because every parameter you change gives you something different, and it trains your mind. So I do a lot of renders when I do an installation or something like, or just a simple exercise. I do 3 or more renders. Mm-hmm. Just to get that established in my mind, and to better understand what I've built there. Because once it's built, you just have fun playing with sliders.
It is like building a tool, as I kind of mentioned. And a lot of it for me is like choosing what I actually post. I'll make more versions than I actually end up sharing often.
Right.
And then it's like, well, do I make a multi-post? Just sometimes I do that, or maybe I'll just share one. I have to choose.
And did this discipline affect your life more than Touch Designer?
It's a good question. I think this has mostly been exploring Touch as a tool. I may branch off in the future, but so far, that's been what I've mostly wanted to work in. I think, it does give you a little bit of structure, I think, in a day where even if I don't do anything else, at least I'm going to make a post. At like the very minimum, it's going to make me create something. And I think that's really key, from kind of coming from like music too. I think there are lessons to be learned from, say, like musicians, where you need to practice every day to keep your performance level up. And I think the same is for anything you want to learn. Like even 10 to 15 minutes a day is just key to like keeping your mind, in shape.
your mind and your muscles, and you don't go to bed sad that you didn't do anything right. You're at least content in a way.
Mm-hmm. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I was looking at your website, and it's a very beautiful website because it feels like a personal research blog rather than a presentation. I mean, it is both things, but it feels really nice. So this is kind of the same-ish content with the Instagram posts, but I think these are more installations that you've worked on.
Yeah, breaking out into projects. So this is something that I had before I started doing the dailies. Is maintaining kind of a portfolio type website, and I'm a little behind actually because I haven't put anything new up as like a page since maybe May, other than my tutorials. So I'm a little behind on that, but as it goes. But yeah, I think it's been a really good platform, especially. I think actually the tutorials that I started creating, that was interesting because I think even more than my daily posts, that drove a lot of people to my website. Just because I host them on my website primarily. And that's where I point people, and I think that's also useful is having a place where you can show your work really simply. And then again, a place to host all of those tutorials that I hope to get some new ones out soon. I know I did one last month, so it's that's a whole nother game. Is like the tutorial creation. It might take. At this point, I can kind of sit down and do one within a day, but it still takes a good portion of a day to practice it and get the patch the way I like it. Set up the recording capture, make the edit, all of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff around the tutorial, but the way that you present them, I mean, I keep coming back to them, not just because of the tutorial, but because of these nice explanations and the theory behind it, because it's very easy to tell someone how to do something, but often you don't know why you are choosing that path. And I'm really coming back, especially to this maybe for the looping part, maybe for the noise part. I mean, there are a lot of great uses of chops and taps here in your tutorials.
Thanks. Yeah.
And
I think I want to start doing more. I was planning on doing some more complex ones, but they're daunting to me to explain complex things. It's just I still want to do it, but I think I might release some simple things in the future too, just because they might be faster for me to put together. But we'll see. Let's see. I'm hoping soon. That'll have the time. Yeah. But I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad too that people get a lot out of them. I think.
Yeah.
It helps. Oddly enough, to have taught university students for 4 years. It's like that was one of those things that I didn't necessarily plan on doing out of school. It was like an opportunity that came my way, and I said, "Oh, okay, this is a way I can teach." That's something that I enjoyed doing, and this is just a way that I can take that and continue to use those skills of passing along information. And I think also it solidifies it more, right? This is a known thing. It's if you teach something, you learn it in a deeper way than just doing it.
Of course. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They look very neat, your tutorials, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the key points in making a good tutorial, and at what point you stop in your work and say, okay, I'm going to do a tutorial about this?
The key points? I mean, I think the why is really important. I think that that's one thing that sometimes is missing is it when there's just sort of a okay, do this, now do this, now do this. I think one can get something out of that, right? You can look at that and say, okay, I see what they're doing because it works, right? And you can reverse engineer it. But I think it is really important to try and articulate the why for each step. really like, and that's hard, is like, you have to really have a grasp on the bigger picture and understand it at the point where you can like describe and articulate the pieces, because then that's a hard thing that happens when you become really fluent and advanced, is sometimes you've internalized all of these small lessons, but they're buried under, you've just buried them under your current like process. And you're like, oh, I guess I have to explain what like translation is or rotation. To some people you do, right? Now I don't do that in all my tutorials. I assume that some people understand what those things are, but like, there's, depending on your audience, you have to really explain things in just like a basic way. So
yes, at least make them clear. And are you confident of your method being the best method or being the method that works?
I definitely don't think there is necessarily a best method. I think it is one that works, and it's one that sometimes I think that one could improve upon, like anything really that I'm doing. But I try to present things where I'm confident that it's a method that will not like break, in a sense that it's stable, essentially. Like, I think that there are a lot of instances where it's like, you could say you're doing something in TOPS, right? You could probably write something that's optimized better by writing it all in GLSL, and just one GLSL block and consolidating it, right? But that's not necessarily the easiest thing to understand, and there's a reason why Touch Designer breaks them all out for the purposes of say like prototyping and being able to branch off and all of these things. So at the end of the day, I think it's about clarity too, like and simplicity and being able to like convey the idea. I try to organize my networks too and like clean them up, get them to be like as concise as I can.
Yeah, you have to do that, especially if there's an installation coming or something like that. You have to optimize, and that's a really big part of the creative process.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that I hope that they're the right way to do it as much as I can.
Yes, from my experience, I used to think that every installation I would see was perfect and well done and rock solid. But I've learned that you have to make it work, you have to make it stable, and that's never gonna be the best solution to do something, because tomorrow they're gonna update the software and the tools, and there's gonna be a lot easier methods to do anything.
Yeah, there's always time too. You only have so much time for a lot of these projects. You have to get something. I think going back, you can always clean up a project that had to happen in 2 weeks.
But do you do that?
Do I do that?
Do you actually do that? Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, I do it again next time, and I try to make it better the next time.
When you reuse the pieces and make it better, right?
I could be better about personally, organizing my tools. I think like that's one thing that I kind of just keep going and grabbing pieces. But, I think to really go forward, that's something I'll have to sit down and do soon, is just like, do a deep, like, okay, this is something I use all the time. Let me actually pull it out as a talks, which I do that, but I could do it more.
How often do you do that? Yeah, right. How often do you do it? Do you have a big collection of tools that you use, or you prefer to rebuild the stuff just to get it into your mind and relearn it?
It's a combination. I think like, for instance, like the looping noise stuff, or like if I have a tool for generating, like there's a cellular automata tool that I built. Hopefully I'll release it sometime. I talked about it at the summit, so that hopefully will come out soon. But, that's like a tool I built that now I have in the palette, and I could grab it if I want, or, other generators and things like that. So I've started to do that, but, often it ends up being faster or easy enough for me to say, okay, I did this thing. I know it exists in my folder for that date, because I date all of my sketches. And so Often it's just as fast for me to go and find that toe file.
Okay.
But that's personally, I know that that's not the best way to do it. But again, it's about time and
yeah. There's folders, there's Git, there's I don't know, the palette. You talked about the elements of the cellular automata, the reaction diffusion and particle systems. Yeah. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about your tool? Or maybe if you want to share a screen or something like that, we can. Whatever feels comfortable.
I guess I haven't pulled it up in a while, but I could do that. Sure. We have enough time, I guess. Let's see. Sure.
Yeah, briefly, if you want to touch these subjects.
Yeah, we could talk about it a little bit. I was thinking, let's see. I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to. Oh, can you see my Touch Designer?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So this is poorly organized here, but in my components. But I should have some. For instance, this is something I've been working on for a while that I hope to release sometime. But it lets me choose different, I don't know if you can see that well, but different Touch Designer rules.
Yeah.
And I have probably some updates I want to make to it before I release, but that's always how it goes. So, this is something that I will grab as a way of generating textures sometimes. And so, if I dive into it, it's really mostly happening as a shader, right?
Okay.
And so this is something that I, looked at a lot of different examples and then kind of figured out, okay, how do I write this in, make this happen in Touch Designer? And because I was really interested in these kind of cellular automata are complex systems where each pixel has kind of an on or off state, or in this case, there's some life where it decays after it dies in a gradient. But yeah, you kind of feed it some basic rules about, it looks at its neighbors and then determines what it does on the next frame. And through that, you can get some really interesting patterns. And so that's been something I've been really interested in. I probably have, some reaction diffusion. So there's a lot of ways to do that too. You can find examples of just even using tops only, like blur and sharpen feedback loop is a really common example. And I've also researched this and looked into sort of writing, slightly more complicated versions that give me more control over the diffusion of the particles for the chemicals in this case. But those have been projects that I, took me a year or more of just coming back to them and researching and looking at different examples, trying to improve them. So those are a couple things that, I've used in some different installations. And that, there aren't necessarily examples out there yet. So hopefully I'll get those together. With particles are one of those things that, I think are, can be a lot of fun. And there's actually one of the tools, and this is kind of coming to, one way that you mentioned, before our call, to think about some resources that I think would be helpful. And actually this is I'm sure everyone knows, a lot of people know about this, the particles GPU example. But what I think the way I use this now is I will almost never use it as is. I looked through the shader in this to the point that I know it inside out and I can modify it. And that's actually a lot of how I started to understand why you would, what you can do with GLSL and how a pixel, and there's a point where you're oh, a pixel is a color, right? There's that, that. And then there's a point where you realize, oh, a pixel also can be a point in space. It can be a velocity. It can be. This
is happening now. This is a big paradigm right now with Touch Design and with users.
When I started to make that understanding shift, a lot of it was looking at the way that this system works is a really great way to understand how that can be done. I mean, there's a lot more pieces than you necessarily like need. It's a pretty complicated example. There are simpler ones out there. I know like Elburz has an example that's a little simpler. But at the same time, this is a great starting point because you have so many pieces that you can just say like adapt. Like it already has this optical flow input. You can, that can be, doesn't have to be optical flow. Like it can be kind of any sort of motion that you want if you can figure out how to generate it. But through studying this, you start to learn a lot about how the system works, and then be able to like build it from scratch or build something similar, or say like add your own attractors and things like that, or so forth. And so even just like a simple task of like, can you make it so that when you click, they gravitate towards the mouse? Like that was an early sort of like, how can I modify the system? How does it work? Thing, and you have to figure out how to get that information into the shader. Where do you put that within the existing structure? So it's a good exercise to just try to look at an existing structure and understand it. This is different than building from scratch. It's like you kind of look at something that's already done. And I would say that this, you can, before I did this at all, I would say this is like, I know everyone references this, but like it's super important. Is this book of shaders, which really like, especially if you're new to shaders, this is like a really great intro, I think. And it honestly took me reading this once and then waiting a year and reading it again before like my mind could start to wrap around it. So also just like be patient too, because this stuff like you said, it's a paradigm shift to start thinking about programming in this way. But I think it's like, especially for graphics, it's not impossible. Like you can do it. There's a lot of great resources out there that kind of show you the way. So I think it's invaluable. And the sooner you can kind of dive in and start to get your head at least like in that game, the better, I think. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on like, some of this stuff.
This was hard to me to look at the images, at pixels and seeing coordinates. The same that it was hard for me to come from a visual motion graphics background and learn Python,
Yeah. And that was one too, where you look at it right away and you're like, this is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to even find, because at that, when I first opened that, I didn't know anything about shaders. And, you eventually realize like, oh, everything is happening in this code. Like there's one text stat that
or
does
one pixel.
Yeah. I mean, there's of course there's like the fragment shader and the vertex shader, and those are both doing different things, but like the simulation is happening in this, in the fragment shader, and all of these tops that you see are really just like passing the data in and then out again as a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So like all of that huge column, it's like all just so you can kind of see what's happening, right? You don't even necessarily need to see that, that external structure. And I would say that tool, like things like the preset loader and like the way that like the UI is all like in this huge column of chops. Like there's different things about it that make it challenging even to like modify. So yeah, I mean, that might be a task for me. It's like strip that of the things I don't use, right? And like have like a simpler base to jump out from. But but I will say it is a nice example. And of course, like if you're interested in this stuff too, I know like Marcus Heckman has a great point clouds particles tutorial that like does it all in tops, which is like you're doing the same concepts, but now that there is the way to instance from tops, like this whole sort of needing to necessarily write it all in a shader, it's less key, though it's still maybe like once you know how to do it.
Yes, I do recommend his work, and I've talked to him. The other episode before this was with Marcus, and I actually pointed out that tutorial with the stars and the space, the universe represented by a top with point cloud. Yeah, that's a big change in Touch Designer, and I hope every one of us starts to understand and approach. Yeah, for me, I'm always curious. I always want to try everything I see new, and sometimes I feel way disoriented when I actually get a grip on something and then it changes. You know, and this is a big change with images used as coordinates and pixels.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I really love it because it does let you do things, a little bit bigger. Like you can, not having to go from tops to chops in order to instance.
Yeah, it makes your computer valuable again. I mean, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a cool. It's a good way to optimize. And okay, so if we are on the subject with sharing tools and ideas, would you like to share some tools or something that inspires you?
Yeah, let's see. I have a couple things. I'll share my screen again.
This is all for the users. This is all.
Yeah, and again, I talked about the book of shaders already.
Yeah.
Here I'm just maybe talking about other people's work that I think is worth checking out. I think David Braun, who I know, he has a really great GitHub, I think, it's worth checking out.
Yeah, this is the gold resource.
Yeah, the Touch Designer shared. I just if you haven't looked, he really graciously shares a lot of this stuff that it's just all sorts of tops. There's some more GLSL examples in here, but also tools for exploring Hilbert curves if you want to get into space filling curves and L systems, and I've definitely used his jump flood algorithm for things. It's a lot of just great tools. So as far as building your tools, do be looking at who people sharing amazing tools that you can use on GitHub. And then also try to understand how they work, because if they're open, you can kind of learn a lot from what other people have created. I obviously this is also, if you're not familiar with AltTD, tons of great tutorials here. I think that it's important to keep doing tutorials. So even
all of the tutorials are here.
Yeah, I know a lot of things myself, but I'm still going to learn more from looking at how other people do things. I'm always a fan of Paquette 12's approaches, because he has such a interesting way of dealing with these top based networks. So I always pick up some interesting tricks and techniques. It makes me think about things in a different way. I appreciate that a lot. Lately I've been going through some of Stas, I'm going to say Simarakov's work. His ray marching tutorials have been really interesting to me. And that's one thing where even after, doing GLSL a chunk, I still I can wrap my head around it, but it's still a world I'm not native in. There's always these rabbit holes where you can go deeper. But just really interesting ways of creating fractals. So that's something I'm kind of into lately. I don't know. Those are all just a handful, but I would definitely check out some of those resources. And
yeah, but this is work for 1 or 2 years to study daily. Yeah, there's a ton of things.
There's more than you could possibly learn in a lifetime.
But they feel this would be the first thing that you would approach if today was your first art designer experience.
Yeah, I think if it was beginning, it's interesting because when I first started, which was maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, there was nowhere near the online resources available to learn. That really, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, has just blossomed really in a beautiful way. But I think so for me, it was I had a friend who, Carlos Garcia, actually, he goes by LO5, but he has some really awesome work. And he was a someone who at University of Michigan, when I was there, was kind of a mentor. So that was really key for me, was having like a mentor, somebody who was at least a little bit ahead of where I was. But now there's so much online content. I think just like finding ways to connect into the community and like being sort of like present in the Facebook group or the it's Discord, right?
Discord, right?
Yeah, It was Slack, but now it's Discord. Being like present in the community, I think like don't be afraid to search, because it's a really open community too, which is what I love about it. It's like so welcoming.
It's the most wonderful community. That's why we are doing this.
Yeah.
Right now.
So don't be afraid to like ask questions and and then also just like keep explore the things that you're interested in. I mean, this wasn't something this is what I did too, but I think just like try to learn. Oh, here's one. So I think like it's really important to also have projects to work towards. So if you can even if you don't have a project, make a project for yourself, or agree to do something you don't know how to do, which is terrifying. But that's how you learn, is you put some pressure on yourself to accomplish it with a deadline and all that. And if you don't have one, try to trick yourself, make one for yourself. And it's hard, but you can do it.
And worst case scenario, just open the operator snippets and just pick something by random.
Yeah, operator snippets. A lot of that's been also just improved greatly. I mean, I know Derivative's been doing a lot to build that out and to fill out those gaps. So I don't know, those a few things.
I did not know about them. 2 years into Touch Designer, and I did not know about that menu when I found it.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah, I did not know about the operator snippets and the Python examples, and I scratched my face. Incomplete as they are, they would have helped me a lot.
Oh yeah, those are key. Cool.
Yeah. And now I want to touch a bit the big work. Let me share the screen for the guys.
Oh yeah, this was a really kind of amazing experience. That it was kind of a competition that I almost didn't submit to, but that's how it goes. You last minute, you're oh, I should do this. But it was kind of Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture in Shenzhen, and they had an open kind of call. This is actually, is not, it's different, using Touch Designer as my kind of main tool, but it's not necessarily this is all rendered. So I'm kind of using it in a weird way, right? This isn't necessarily a real-time system, but yeah, it was kind of crazy. I was in, flew out to Shenzhen for a little over a week, which was a really interesting experience, and worked to finish this portion of a larger show. So there were a few other artists who also were kind of it was a competition really, so winners in the competition, and then we kind of put together a 15-minute show where we each had a section of it. But yeah, just for me, experiencing my work on this was 41 skyscrapers just in the middle of Shenzhen that all have LEDs from bottom to top. That was really real.
I'm going to play it for 1 second because I can hear you if I play it, but just for the users to see it. This is amazing. It looks amazing and huge.
Yeah, the scale is what kind of just blows anyone away. It's so I think, it was a really amazing opportunity, and kind of going out there and.
But how did they? Did you actually went and see the setup for this?
Yeah, I don't know the behind the scenes too much. It gets into a funny kind of situation with different companies communicating with one another. As far as we don't know, I don't know exactly what's behind it, but. And that's a whole other story. But yeah, it was really kind of interesting to be out there and to say we, would create video and and test it in the night and say like, okay, what actually worked, what doesn't, and there's certain limitations that I didn't expect as far as like, you know, the refresh rates and things like that, and like how fast can your content change for the, you know, the LEDs. So it was definitely like a learning experience for me, and just like really awesome to be able to like go create content, see it at this scale, and then go and like change it the next day and make updates to it for, you know, a week or so. So yeah, definitely, as you said, like humbling too, because it's just like such a huge canvas. It's almost like daunting to put content onto it.
Yes. But this is how the future will look, and you're setting a tone, man. This is amazing work. Great. And there was a lot of projects. This one, right? Yeah. The Michigan SAAJTAK. Am I pronouncing it right?
Michigan Center. It's a SAAJTAK Center for the Arts. Yeah, I put this. It ran for a couple months at least, maybe 3 last fall. And it's a very like a much smaller scale as far as like, you know, it's a local art center that commissioned me to do the work. But it was really, I thought it turned out really well. It's kind of funny. I came up with this idea of, you know, creating like shadows that would be turned into, it's not like an original idea, right? Like it's like kind of like, oh, shadow puppets. And then I also learned like almost after finishing it that like, oh yeah, like Zach Lieberman, who's an artist who I really love, has like a work that's like very similar, which is like, was like a, oh no, but I don't know. I think it differentiates itself enough. I don't feel too much like I'm ripping off, but it was one of those funny moments for me. But yeah, that piece was cool in the sense that, you know, it was kind of one of those one person shows where I just had like built it all the structures and you know, did all the like all the components myself, which is just like tiresome.
Yeah, you were the director of the whole event, right?
Yeah, and that was one too where I you know, I had 2 pieces in that too. So there's that one, and there's one across the like space. But you know, I think for me it was a good feeling to get to the point where I can say like, oh yeah, I can put up a physical installation that can successfully run in a location that I'm not in for 3 months. You know? Yeah,
that takes a level of confidence.
Yeah,
to walk away.
You know, and I've done that kind of stuff before, but I think this was like another level where, for me, it was like trying to level up what I can do on a small budget too, just like by myself.
But this is way more challenging, and this is a big question mark for many of the art design developers. After you install a project in a space and you go home, what's the process? I mean, how did this experience work out for you? Did it crash? Did it not crash? Did they want something more? I don't know. Did they interact?
They were happy. Yeah. I mean, luckily they were super like, you know, they just loved the works that they had, and I think like seeing kids interact with it was really like,
yeah, kids are wonderful. Yeah, they tell you everything about your work.
Yeah, there were some challenges, like things I learned that I just didn't have the ability to fix, like structural things that shifted. Like I had some cameras shift, and I hadn't really built in an auto calibration system, so it was like, oh, okay. Kind of stuff like learning curve things, and you know, I didn't connect it to. Luckily, like the software was fine. I didn't actually do like a remote in solution, which, you know, is kind of risky. I know a lot of people do that. But I knew that if I really had to, I could, you know, drive over. It was like a few hours, but I could do it if I needed to. Yeah. But I also had someone on the ground who could kind of like troubleshoot. I think the only thing that really needed troubleshooting was actually some technology that they provided for doing some like, I think we had some like HDMI to Ethernet extenders to get to the projectors. Okay. And one of those liked to just stop connecting.
Yeah, and that breaks all the flow, the installation.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have your contact going to the projector, it's nothing, right? But that was something that seemed to resolve itself the 2 times that it broke. So it ended up being okay. Oh, and there were some things that broke too physically that weren't a big deal, but it's just like when you have people, playing with something for a month or 2, there's going to be something that breaks.
Inevitably it's going to break. Yeah.
When you have kids, so
kids test your stuff.
Right.
Yeah, they do.
No, but I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised, or at least happy when I went to tear it down. That it actually looked great. Like it still is running, still functional, and that's like kind of the goal. That's something that's still people can still play with after it's been, And again, this was like 3 months or so, so it's certainly not like a permanent install. But again, it wasn't.
It's a challenge.
The budget wasn't for a permanent install either. So
I've used to go with installations to festivals, and I didn't want to stay there to look at it, and I would automate some procedural scripts, like when the computer opens and the guy puts the USBs in, I told them in which order, and the computer would look for that order.
Oh yeah, I mean the automation for this, I basically did. You have to have a script that runs right when you turn on the computer to set everything up, and especially that one. Umbra that had the sort of shadows you create in the projection, because I'm running all Touch Designer and Max, so I'm doing a little bit of kind of blob
channeling between
sending them back and forth, and so there's a whole order that you need to open things, but then also
that's what I'm talking about.
The rough thing is I'm using Logitech cameras in that.
Okay.
And just decent webcams, but still consumer level. And there's just no way without using your mouse to calibrate them. And so I basically, there's a software called AutoIt, AUTOIT, and it lets you script keyboard strokes and mouse clicks.
Right, those kind of.
I basically had to figure out. I was able to write a function that could, once I opened the window, would do the keyboard presses to set each camera to turn off the audio exposure, to turn off the auto brightness and stuff. But that was, it opens up a Touch Designer window and then the mouse clicks a button and opens the dialogue, and then it's just I'm just it's got to be a better way to do this. But
no,
sometimes there's not. It's just that's the drivers don't work.
And you have to teach maybe the person there or the janitor to do that.
Right, you can't do that. The keyboard's locked in the box, right? You want it to be you turn on the computer, and it's funny, the projector shows up, and then you see the mouse moving, and it's pretty fun. But that's how it works,
I think we covered a lot of work here, but this comes to me as a big surprise, and I've spent about 2 or 3 hours listening to your music, man.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And your bands, let me just share again the screen if I can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a SAAJTAK. It's a pretty hard one to say. Yeah.
The vocalist, Alex Coy, right? Am I pronouncing it right? Okay. I've rarely heard such a beautiful voice.
Yeah, she's amazing to work with. I mean, just everybody, I don't know. I feel very lucky to be playing with folks who are just professional musician level. I studied music too, but I feel my career right now is working in the interactive media, but to be able to still be playing. Yeah,
but it's all about composition, and if you can work in one art, you can translate your knowledge into the other arts. We will touch on this subject in a minute, but I wanted to. Yeah, no, we can talk about this. We can talk about this if you want to. This is a big subject. Why having 2 careers as a musician and as or maybe one as an explorer, because I see it like that. I also like to play instruments. I know how that feels, and I have some band. I really like your sound. I wanted to tell you this before we jump into the discussion. I really like your sound. I really like her voice, her Björk harmonic type of voice, and very powerful and very, very sweet in the same time. And I was expecting something glitchy and electronic or stuff like, because many touch designers users go in that direction, but this is almost snarky poppy jazz and stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because I love that, like the minimalist glitch stuff too. Like I come from that vein, of course. Like I've made a lot of it, but I think it's great kind of like working in a space where you're like playing with musicians that pull you in like different directions, and like there's a space for that in this group sometimes.
Yeah, I've heard saxophones like Coltrane or Charles Mingus band's saxophone, like classic saxophone, and then some electronic waves and beats. I mean, this is a very nice composite of things. So, how do you explore your music? I feel like you are taking everything that seems best, or everything that seems pleasant to hear, and rematched it.
This band is an interesting process, I think, like, because we all come from like an improvisation background, like free jazz or like, free improvisation, among others. Like we've all studied classical and jazz and composition and all of these things, but it comes together from like a place of improvisation a lot of the time. So we like get together and we improvise, and then we record and like listen back and like have these group collaborative composition sessions, which at this point right now we're actually doing remote collaboration, but for the first 4 or 5 years, it's been like all of our music is just like, it takes a long time to write because we get into a group and we just like basically make compositional decisions together, and then try it out and listen back. And I have like hours and hours and hours of Zoom recordings of like every rehearsal that's just like dated.
Wow,
and then chopped up into like ideas, and then we review those. And it's a long process, but like I think it helped us find kind of our sound as a group, and then now we're at the point where we can write music faster together. But it like took us a long time and a lot of like collaborative sessions to really find.
And how do you manage to keep an equilibrium with the time between your work, or your work? This is a passion. I wouldn't call it work. Especially, I mean, they are both passion, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really hard. It is one of those things where it's always a balance. Like everyone in the group has to sort of balance, like, okay, how do we keep this project going that we believe in and that we know we can get off the ground, but it's also kind of eclectic. It's like challenging to get it off the ground. And I think, like how do we put a lot of energy into it, but it doesn't necessarily like, we also all have other things going on too. So it's definitely like requires us all to really, we schedule rehearsals, and sometimes we'll have like, when we were all in town, we would have like, I don't know, we might have like back-to-back rehearsals for 3 days, or 4 days, and like write a song and that, or like record, or, like just a lot of like blocking off time. And then, especially when I was freelancing, I could kind of fit it in pretty easily.
And do you combine the work? Do you ever feel like you're playing the keyboards and you have to jump to the computer and make something for the visuals or stuff like that? I mean,
I've tried it. Like there was one when we have now like an audio visual show that is in the process. Like we've performed it a couple times, but I tried at one point saying like, okay, we have like video cues and I'm delegating people to press them at certain times. Yeah. And I learned through experience that that's like not a good idea. At least for us.
You can't be all the places all the time.
You need to be playing music and to be also trying to think about the visuals at the same time. It's not, I mean, you could do it. I think you could create a practice, right? Where you do that. But for us, it just wasn't going to work. So I think like for me, I still design the visuals for us and like the system to perform play the visuals in Touch Designer, like the performance interface. But I typically try to train somebody else to do the show. So logistically it's a challenge, and
it pains you maybe a little, but you cannot do all the things. It's not going to work well.
But I mean, it's definitely an important part of my practice, and I like, I kind of keep it going no matter what I'm doing otherwise. Like even right now we're all separated by distance. We can't be like rehearsing right now, but it's actually really exciting that in the last like 3 weeks or so, we've never done this before because we've always been able to play together. But we started a like process where we each spend one day kind of starting an idea, passing it along. So it takes 4 days, and we share like an Ableton session. And also, like, they're not Ableton users necessarily, so it's like an interesting thing, to like a learning experience. But it ends up like we came up with some really interesting kind of like relatively fleshed out ideas through this process, and that's sort of exciting because it's like a new way that we are having to learn to collaborate right now. But it's also exciting that it's like new ideas are coming out of it, right? That weren't. It feels like it's a different process, but it's still like it's a worthwhile process. So
yes, it's a new process, and we are finding ways to collaborate and share ideas with each other. What has changed for you during these last weeks of quarantine, staying at home?
I mean, apart from like that's a big one, and I think there's just a general. There's a shift where I was thinking about like online a little bit more, which is not something I've ever wanted to really do, but getting into like thinking about how to create content that somebody doesn't need to be in a specific space, like things that you can share remotely. That's something that's been on my mind a lot, just in terms of like the work that I'm doing. Like interactive experiences, and and thinking about how to collaborate with people remotely. Which I've already done a little bit, being someone who's worked remote from home, right? That hasn't changed, but just my like, ability to like go have coffee and like meet with someone, or like even just like rehearsing with my band, for instance. Like, we canceled a tour, right? It's like, oh, okay, it's like those are the kinds of things that changed. Like a lot of thinking about how to engage audiences, both for my band and for work, without actually being able to be in a space, which I think is so important to like music. It's important to interactive art and installations. So I'm just saying, I think it's worthwhile thinking about, but it's a challenge, and I'm looking forward to, making it through this and finding like, what we can do in sort of a post-pandemic, like planning for that, because it'll happen, but it's just a scary time right now. So,
And do you have some final encouragement message for all the users that will see this video?
I don't want to end on that note. I mean, I think right now, like, yes, it is a key. It's a time when you can learn a lot, but I think also it's like important right now to just like be okay with like keeping yourself sane, whatever that means. And I think like if that means diving into Touch Designer, great. But if it's too much, like that's okay too. I think like it's not necessarily the time to learn something unless you're able to do it. I know people who were like, oh, I'm going to learn a language now. And we're just like, no, it's not the time. And so, be like receptive to yourself right now, especially is maybe what I'll say. Like, it's not necessarily the time to push yourself. Or maybe it is, I think it could be, it's really just like an introspective thing.
I've tried. I bought 2 books on programming, and I've decided that I'm gonna perfect. So I don't know, beef up my skills. I've tried, and then I've got a little bit depressed because it didn't work. And then it switched to this right now.
Great. Yeah.
I'm just trying to give something back, and this feels like a great opportunity to not stay, I don't know, me inside alone with my mind and working on that stuff and exhausting myself, but getting a fresh perspective out of everybody that's
definitely
experiencing this.
But I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I hope too.
Just stay optimistic.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon.
Cool.
This has been great. Thank you for everything. I'm going to end the video with, I'm going to edit it, but I'm going to leave a little bit of your music, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
On the ending, because this is great music, guys. Please visit everything. Not only the tutorial, not only the Instagram and website, the music also.
Thank you.
Yeah, Simon. Okay.
Cool. All right. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Okay, bye.